He left for deployment with pride in his heart and a promise to protect the country he loved. His land, his ranch, his legacy, everything he had built, was supposed to be waiting when he came back. But while he wore the uniform overseas, fighting battles miles away, another war was brewing right here at home. The HOA circled like vultures, selling his property behind his back, erasing his name as if his sacrifice meant nothing. Neighbors whispered, papers were signed, and by the time he returned, the place he called home was no longer his. But what the HOA didn't realize was that he wasn't just any man. They had crossed a soldier, a protector, and the army wasn't about to let this stand. What happens when the fight for justice comes not from one man, but from an entire force determined to make things right? Watch closely because this is more than one story. It's a reckoning. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear will leave you stunned. Malik Johnson had always found peace in the land he called home. His ranch wasn't just acres of soil and fences, it was history, passed down from his father and worked on with his own two hands. Early mornings meant the sound of roosters echoing across the valley, the smell of fresh hay, and the steady rhythm of boots on dirt. To Malik, this place was more than property. It was his anchor, his safe ground in a world that often reminded him he didn't fully belong. When neighbors drove past, they'd see a man steady in his routine, waving politely as he worked, never knowing how much he sacrificed to hold on to this land. Malik was also a soldier. When the call came for him to serve overseas, he didn't hesitate. Packing his uniform into a worn duffel bag, he told himself the ranch would be waiting when he returned. He trusted that his service meant something, that the sacrifices he made for his country would be honored. But in the back of his mind, he knew how the world often treated men who looked like him. Still, he pushed the doubt aside, convincing himself that here, at least at home, he was secure. The HOA board had always eyed his land with thinly veiled envy. Meetings were tense, their words wrapped in polite smiles but dripping with condescension. They saw Malik's ranch as prime real estate, a prize they believed deserved different hands. Malik felt it in the pauses during conversations, in the way they emphasized rules that never seemed to apply to anyone else. But he never thought they'd dare cross the line. After all, he was defending their freedom while he was away. Who would be so bold as to strip a soldier of his home? What Malik didn't know, what no one told him, was that while he was thousands of miles away in desert heat and foreign soil, the very people meant to uphold community trust were plotting to erase his name from the land he loved. His absence was their opportunity, and soon, the life he thought was waiting for him would be nothing more than a memory. While Malik Johnson was overseas, pushing through the exhaustion of endless patrols and the weight of a rifle that felt heavier with every passing day, back home his world was being dismantled piece by piece. The HOA board met in quiet rooms, their voices lowered, their plans deliberate. To them, Malik's absence was more than a convenience. It was an opportunity. They drafted letters, claimed missed payments that never existed, and circulated whispers that the ranch was abandoned. With each forged document, they built their case, disguising theft as legality. By the time Malik's deployment was nearing its end, the signs were already visible. Neighbors noticed strange trucks parked at the ranch. Fences he had repaired with his own hands were being torn down. The barn, his father's barn, was emptied, its tools scattered like relics no one cared for. A new family had moved in, smiling for pictures on the porch, as though the blood and sweat that went into that land had never been Malik's at all. When Malik finally returned, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, boots still caked in the dust of war. He expected the familiar comfort of his ranch, but what he saw instead was a nightmare. A for sale sign stood proudly at the edge of his property, the house freshly painted, his belongings gone. Strangers waved as though he were just another passerby. His chest tightened. The ground beneath his feet, once steady and safe, now felt foreign. He wasn't home. He was an intruder in the very place he had fought to protect. Malik confronted the HOA, demanding answers, demanding justice. But their words were cold, clipped, practiced. They claimed he had defaulted on community fees, that notices had gone unanswered, that the sale was legal. Malik knew it was a lie, but in their eyes, the truth didn't matter. What mattered was that he was a black man standing alone against a system designed to erase his voice. Every attempt to argue, every plea for fairness, was met with smirks and dismissive shrugs. As he stood in those meetings, surrounded by faces that carried both power and prejudice, Malik felt the full weight of betrayal. He had given everything for a country that now seemed eager to strip him of the little he had left. Yet beneath the humiliation and anger, something else burned, a resolve. Because Malik wasn't just fighting for his land anymore. He was fighting for the principle that men like him couldn't be erased so easily. But the more he pushed, the harder the resistance grew. HOA lawyers piled on threats, court documents multiplied, and every door Malik knocked on seemed to close faster than the last. It was no longer just about property. It was about dignity, justice, and survival. And just when it seemed the walls were closing in, Malik reached out to the one force the HOA hadn't anticipated, the U.S. Army itself. His brothers and sisters in uniform, the ones who knew his sacrifice, weren't about to let one of their own be destroyed without a fight. The question now was simple but terrifying. Would the power of his service be enough to reclaim what had been stolen? Or would the system swallow him whole before justice could be done? Malik stood in the county courtroom, the air so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. The HOA board sat smugly at their table, their lawyers armed with stacks of papers and rehearsed lies. To them, it was already over. The land was gone, the deal was sealed, and Malik was just a man grasping at what they had neatly stolen. But for Malik, this was more than a hearing. This was the moment where his family's legacy, his father's sweat, and his own sacrifices overseas hung in the balance. When the judge read the HOA's claims aloud, Malik's stomach twisted. Defaulted dues, vacant property, abandonment. Each word felt like a blade, rewriting his life as though his years of service, his deployments, his sleepless nights in hostile deserts meant nothing. He wanted to shout, to make them feel the fire of injustice burning in his chest, but he knew the system wasn't built for his voice. He had to endure. Then, just as the gavel was about to fall, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The sound echoed like thunder, turning every head. In walked men and women in uniform, Malik's brothers and sisters from the army. Rows of medals glinted under the fluorescent lights, boots striking the floor in unison. They weren't just there as silent witnesses. They were a force, a living testament to Malik's service and sacrifice. The HOA lawyers faltered. Their polished arguments suddenly looked fragile against the presence of soldiers who had bled beside Malik. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. For the first time, the HOA board shifted in their seats, their confidence cracking. Malik's commanding officer stepped forward, placing a firm hand on his shoulder, grounding him in that moment. He didn't abandon his land, the officer's voice rang out, steady and unshakable. He was serving this country while you tried to steal it. Gasps broke across the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked. The weight of truth was undeniable, and the smugness drained from the HOA's faces. Still, the judge's decision hadn't been made. Malik's future hovered in a razor-thin balance. His chest heaved as he locked eyes with the board members, their arrogance now mixed with fear. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every soldier who came home to find the very freedoms they fought for stripped away. Every black man who returned from service only to face a different kind of war on his own soil. And as the judge leaned forward, gavel in hand, the silence was suffocating. One strike could mean Malik lost everything, or it could mean justice would finally pierce through the lies. The gavel hovered, the room frozen in suspense. Malik's heart pounded like a drum. Would his service, his sacrifice, his very identity as both a soldier and a black man finally matter here? Or would this be the day he was erased from his own land forever? The gavel struck. The courtroom exhaled. The judge's words cut through the silence, and for the first time in months, Malik felt something he thought had been stripped away from him. Dignity. His land was restored. The lies the HOA had built their case on collapsed under the weight of truth. But even in victory, Malik knew the scars ran deeper than property. Lines. He walked out of that courtroom, not as a man who had simply won, but as a man who had been forced to fight battles he never should have faced, first on foreign soil and then in his own backyard. The relief on his face was real, but so was the heaviness in his chest. Because for every Malik who stood in front of a judge and reclaimed what was his, how many others had lost everything in silence? How many names were missing from the record? Their stories erased before they could even be told. In the weeks that followed, Malik's case became more than paperwork. It became a spark. His story spread through the community, in headlines, in conversations at dinner tables, in late-night debates where people wrestled with the uncomfortable truth. That racism wasn't hidden in shadows. It was baked into the systems people trusted to protect them. His neighbors, once silent, began speaking up about their own encounters. Soldiers reached out, sharing stories of coming home only to fight a different war on their own streets. Malik didn't see himself as a hero. He saw himself as a man who was simply tired of proving his worth in a country he had already bled for. Yet, his resilience gave others courage. He reminded them that silence is not safety, that speaking out, even when your voice shakes, is the only way change begins to take shape. But here's the haunting truth. Malik's victory didn't end racism. It didn't erase the humiliation, the fear, the injustice that so many still face every single day. His story was a mirror, forcing America to look at itself, and the reflection wasn't easy to stomach. And so the question lingers, how many more Maliks will it take? How many more lives turned upside down before systems change? Before equality isn't just words in a pledge, but a lived reality. This is not just Malik's story. It is our story. It is a reminder that racism doesn't need fire hoses or mobs to exist. It thrives in boardrooms, in neighborhoods, in policies designed to exclude. And until each of us decides that silence is no longer an option, it will keep repeating. So as you sit with Malik's story tonight, ask yourself, what side of history do you want to stand on? Will you be a silent witness or a voice for justice? If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. Because these stories need to be told, not just once, but until change becomes undeniable. Because in the end, it's not just about Malik's fight, it's about ours.